I feel like we have to start with the obvious, though, which is this is what you wrote on the sheet. This is what I'm going to tell people you wrote on the sheet. It said something to the effect of Mariners are still rolling.
Okay, they've okay, that's fine. I'm fine with arguing with that about that because they lost a game today already, right?
Yes, they did. They lost the series. They've lost 3 out of their last 4. So they're not. I mean, at the
3 out of their last 4 games.
Yes, a few days ago, I would agree with you. They were still rolling, but now there are some cracks in the armor. So I think we got to start there because the last couple days have not been kind to the Mariners. They went into Minnesota. Now Minnesota is every year. I feel like the Minnesota Twins are the exact same team every year. They're like, you look at them on paper, you're like, these guys, they're not very good, and then they outplay what you would expect. They're like everybody in the Central is kind of like this, where the Central's never that strong, the AL Central. So it's kind of like you have teams that are barely above 500 that on any given day will look much better than that. Right. And like the Twins are one of those teams, like, I feel like they never look bad. Like they never go out and get their ass kicked, really. They always kind of hang around in games. But at the end of the year, you're like, okay, they're like a little bit above 500. And there's nobody on that roster that really, really scares you, right? They're just kind of like a bunch of slightly above average dudes that kind of outplay their potential. And as a unit, they're pretty strong. But the Mariners going to Minnesota, and for all intents and purposes, they got it handed to them. They got their ass kicked. They had their one win in the series was very impressive. They scored 10 runs in their one win, which is a season high or ties a season high. So they did have one very positive game in there, a game in which the Mariners had to come back twice to actually retake the lead and ultimately win. So it wasn't like it was a dominating 10-run performance. It was, they really needed all 10 of those runs, but the other 3 games, they didn't look so good. Their old problems seem to come back loose. They get guys on base, but they can't drive them in. They're striking out at what I would call a remarkable clip. It's not necessarily historic, but it's very bad. It's worse than it was a year ago. And they're striking out a lot, obviously. And then probably the most concerning thing at this point in time, the last 2 games, their starting pitching, their 2 best starting pitchers, George Kirby and Logan Gilbert, have looked vulnerable. They've both got it, they both got hammered by a Twins offense that, again, on paper is they're not world beaters, but for whatever reason, Kirby and Gilbert they had rough first innings in their starts, and they really never rebounded as their starts went on. So that's probably the bigger issue, is that, the pitching up to this point has basically carried the Mariners ball club. They've had to be perfect because of the flaws in the offense. And suddenly over the past couple days, they've looked, they look like a little bit rockier than we would expect. So that's kind of where we're at with these guys.
And this is, I'm kind of surprised that this fan base kind of unites around like a single issue. I will say, like, of all the fan bases in Seattle, I find that the most, like, to use a potentially aged term, the most like group-thinky fan base is the Mariners. The Mariners, you're either like an analytics guy and you're all the way down the analytics road, or you're the opposite. The sky is falling all the time. It's all about some narrative and the narrative folks and the analytics folks occasionally cross paths. And it feels like in this case, they've crossed paths because the Mariners are striking out a ton. They lead the league in strikeouts. This is the Fangraphs, by the way, the team leaderboards. They lead the league in strikeouts, and it's also like by a pretty hefty margin. They're striking out 28.3% of the time. The Rockies are next in line. Rockies a terrible team, by the way.
Yeah.
The Reds are next at 26.5, 26.3. That's a pretty big gap at the bottom of the leaderboard. Those are 2 like really, really, really bad offenses, by the way. I will say this. It's bad. Like, and especially to be, I guess we should start with this. I think you and I'll speak for me, and you can just give me a nod or 2 blinks if you agree. I think Jerry Dipoto deserves to be fired. So I'm going to say that to start with, because I'm going to say some stuff that kind of sounds like I'm trying to pour cold water on an angry issue for fans. It's not. I don't feel that. I don't feel like this. Any of what I'm going to say should absolve Jerry Dipoto. But so the Mariners lead the league in strikeouts. That is true. I do think I will say, because your note in this was, what do the Mariners need to do to like change philosophically?
I guess, I would just kind of preface that by saying, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why the Mariners, especially their offense, is struggling. I mean, you could look at it strictly as like personnel. They didn't bring in enough guys who can actually hit to make their offense better or lengthen their offense. But I think the reason I see it as a philosophical problem is they really preach strategy, right? Like the Mariners, whether they're actually living the things that they say or not, they publicly preach dominate the zone, control the zone. They preach all these philosophies. It's kind of like when you work for a company that talks all the time about culture and how great the culture is and how everybody gets along, and yet everyone's still an asshole, right? Like we all know those companies that on paper, they're really kind of paying these things lip service, but they're not actually carrying them out behind the scenes. That's kind of what it feels like the Mariners are doing with their philosophies. Now, their control the zone philosophy obviously works very well for pitching. Whatever they're doing with their pitchers, it works. They've not only proven that they can take talented starting pitchers and make them excel to an all-star level, but they take, average relief pitchers off the scrap heap and turn them into, leverage arms. So clearly it's working for pitching, but whatever that philosophy is with hitting, it hasn't worked for a number of years now, to the point where your talented guys like the Julios of the world, they keep getting off to these slow starts. They really can't find it. And it almost seems like once a guy like Julio gets it going, it's not because he's buying into some philosophy necessarily. It's like he just starts something clicks, with him, because he's just that talented. With a lot of these other guys, it's like whatever the philosophy is, it has them going up there and looking for the long ball every single time, to the point where even a casual fan should be able to see when these guys go up there and take hacks. I mean, they are swinging off their heels every single time. It looks like a slow pitch softball team up there. No one's looking for a base hit. Everyone is looking to hammer the ball. And to their credit, most of the guys in this lineup can hit home runs. But, there's a big difference between a guy who gets 10 to 15 home runs a year trying to take it out of the park every time and a guy who hits 40 bombs a year trying to do that. Like, you can live with it with the 40 home run guy. But if you're a guy who's going to hit 10 or 15 home runs a year, like, shouldn't you be looking for contact most of the time? Like, the long ball is not your friend necessarily. So whatever this philosophy is that has them striking out so much while hunting for, whether it's exit velo, launch angle, or just to hammer the baseball as hard as you can, the shit's not working. So it has to change.
Yeah. So I basically, I think you're right that there's like a talent issue. I do think there's also a thing, and I just wanted to show this to you because you'll hear people sometimes talk about like batted ball luck or bad luck in baseball, and it's like a lot of times that's from a narrative perspective, but some of this you can actually quantify statistically. So I look at the Mariners; they have one of the worst whiff rates in baseball. That's not going to be a surprise because they have the highest strikeout rate in baseball, obviously, but they're not actually the worst whiff rate in baseball. Their zone contact percentage is relatively low, but again, it's not the worst in baseball, and some of the same offenders are there. They swing. Their like zone swing percentage is, and I guess what I'm saying is like there are things that like make up a strikeout stat. There are things that contribute to that. The Mariners are not really. They've struck out at a very high rate. I think that anybody looking at these numbers would say it's obvious why they're striking out at an extremely high rate. It's because they can't hit the ball and they swing out of the zone too much. That's definitely true. But the degree to which they're being affected by that, to me, feels like it's bad luck, which is crazy to say when you're like, also, they're a really, really bad team at these specific things. They're like a bottom third team in all these things, but they are like probably close to a standard deviation worse than the next worst team, next worst team. And they're not that bad. They're actually probably, so what I'm telling you, one thing I will say is as the season goes on, they're almost certainly going to be better because their sequencing luck gets better because sequencing luck levels out as time goes on. And it's not going to be because don't immediately give it like the narrative stamp of approval, because they probably didn't actually do anything to fix it, is going to be what I'm going to say. It's going to get a little bit better. They probably didn't do anything. They're just a little bit less shitty than they actually look on paper.
And I think, but that kind of leads me back to the whole philosophy thing. It's like, whatever the philosophy is that you're theoretically carrying through the entire season, from spring training to the end of the year, that's the problem. To me, that's the problem, because even when we see the Mariners offense improve, it's improving from such a low bar.
Sure.
That it's not like they're becoming top of the league in offense. They're just getting to an average level because the bar was so low for them to overcome. When you're starting from the bottom, you don't necessarily make it all the way to the top, right? And that's kind of how it feels with the Mariners offense. Now, maybe the front office, maybe the coaching staff, they understand that going in. They look at the guys they have on paper, they look at their metrics, they look at these people, and they say, there's no way we're ever going to be more than an average offense, even at our best. But if that's the case, then you have to account for it in other ways. I get right now and we've talked about this before, they're a one-trick pony. They have great pitching. Their defense sucks. Their offense sucks, but they have great pitching. And now the problem that, this is why I said the last couple of days have been a little bit concerning, is because all of a sudden their pitching staff seems vulnerable, or at least their two best pitchers who had really been cruising up to this point. Now, maybe it's just a matter of the team they were playing, the Twins, happened to just be that good at hitting the baseball that they're going to make any pitching staff look bad. The Mariners come back home now. They're facing the Oakland A's. Oakland A's on paper should be terrible, but it's I would call it a pretty interesting series, because the A's are right behind the Mariners in the standings and have really, really outplayed what anybody thought.
I think the key is not having any fans in the stadium. I think that's what's helping them.
They have no pressure. The A's are the ultimate definition of a team that should have zero pressure on their shoulders. None of those guys on the roster are name guys. A lot of them are younger. So, they're just, in a lot of cases, probably just happy to be here to some degree. And they're nomadic. They don't have a home beginning next year. They're moving out of Oakland. They're moving to Sacramento for a couple of years, and then possibly to Vegas. So yeah, they have no reason to feel tight anytime they go out there and play. They've been playing. I was actually looking at the A's last few weeks. Now they lost the last couple games. They kind of been put in their place by the Rangers a little bit, but we know how good the Rangers are. Prior to that, they won some big series against good competition. So they're playing well right now, and I actually think where your typical A's Mariners series is nothing, and most A's Mariners series are low draw, not that, exciting of an affair. This one actually means a little bit, just because of where they are in the standings. The fact that the two bottom teams in the AL West right now are effectively out of it. The Astros and the Angels, of course, we expect the Astros will make a surge at some point. The Angels probably won't, just looking at how their roster is constructed and the perennial injuries they have.
Well, yeah, Mike Trout's out for a while.
Yeah, but the A's are right there, and it's like if
at least they have Shohei Ohtani to fall back on.
Oh, unfortunate. Yeah, but I'm curious to see, like, when the A's come into town, are the Mariners going to do to them what they did to the Rockies? Bad team on paper that is actually bad, and win that series the way you'd expect? Or are they going to let the A's hang around? Are they going to show some of these vulnerabilities that they've been showing the past few days against the Twins and let that become an issue, basically? I mean, I think the one thing in Major League Baseball, the first month of the year, and we're now past that, but the first month of the year is often dominated, I feel like, by pitching. You got cold weather in a lot of cities. The pitchers kind of have the advantage. A lot of hitters just haven't really warmed up yet. We always see the ball start flying as the weather warms up. And so you kind of expect pitching to dominate.
Also, pitchers are fresh.
Yeah, you expect pitching to dominate and carry a team through the first month of the season. That's exactly what happened with the Mariners. So you would expect a little bit of regression from the Mariner pitching staff just because of how good they have been. Like, they've been as good as advertised for a lot of these guys, but also probably
better than that.
Yeah, they've been better. I mean, for sure. So you would expect some regression there. But if the pitching staff is going to regress, you have to hope and expect that the Mariners offense will start to improve a little bit. And if that doesn't happen, then what you have is a real problem, because now you're going to start losing more games than you're winning. And right now you're only a couple games over 500. I mean, I know even the Mariners just being a couple games over 500, it feels like you're reserving your playoff tickets, because there's been so few seasons where they are even that good above average. But there's a lot of season left to play. the Rangers are the defending world champs in your division. You've got the Astros, who are always going to be there. Now you got this threat of the A's for whatever they are. And if you're the Mariners, man, you got to continue to make hay right now. And so just kind of seeing these, in some ways, two ships passing in the night, with the pitching potentially declining a little bit and the offense potentially getting better, but not showing any signs of doing that right now. It's going to be interesting to see where they go at this point.
Okay, one last thing on this. The Mariners are one of the worst offenses in baseball by expected weighted on base. When it's park adjusted, WRC plus, it's they're about a league average offense. So take from that what you want. They're actually, this is kind of an interesting, the league on average is a little more lucky than they are unlucky. Sorry, they're a little more, the league on average is a little bit unlucky technically compared to this weighted on base average stat. The Mariners are less unlucky. So they're actually, by this weighted on base average, they're more lucky than the average team and still suck. They're still one of the worst offenses in baseball by this specific statistic. Their pitching staff, which I'll show you real quickly before we bore everyone by giving them essentially a fucking PowerPoint here, is their pitching staff, by that exact same stat, is the best in baseball. So it is exactly what you think. They have a very good pitching staff. They have a very bad offense. And I don't know. Like, the thing that is annoying is it's not really Jerry DiPoto's 2024 acquisitions that are bringing it down. It's Julio Rodriguez, if we're being honest. What you are, the biggest gap in expectation compared to reality is what you're getting out of Julio Rodriguez.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to scapegoat the best players on the team. We've been doing that. I mean, you've been doing that. We've talked about it a lot. And it's fair to say, like, hey, if your best hitters don't get going, then, you know, you're probably going to suck. But at the same time, you've been kind of getting unexpected contributions from guys like Josh Rojas, who has emerged as your best hitter in this stretch, which is kind of funny.
The guy you hated, you would not let him have a peaceful offseason.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that he's been outplaying his potential, and the fact, like, he's probably not going to do this all year. So at some point he's going to regress. Is he going to regress at the same time that the middle of the order guys that you're counting on step up, or are they all just going to suck together? Because if they all suck together, then this gets worse. The point about the stat that you brought up, you know, kind of their luck versus unluckiness or luckiness. When you strike out a lot, you're not going to be as susceptible to finding yourself lucky or unlucky because you're just flat out not putting the ball in play. I do
think, for the record, I do think their strikeouts have some sequencing luck shit with them. Their strikeouts should improve with no philosophy change, with no tactical change. Not to say they couldn't improve more if something that's a little more squishy changes, something that's a philosophical change. A personnel change would probably be the biggest change they could make, is like multiple personnel changes instead of trying to talk Julio Rodriguez out of chasing. I'm not saying that you need to replace Julio Rodriguez, but I'm saying, like, these guys who are problems strikeout wise, getting them to stop swinging at balls out of the zone or stop swinging and missing is going to be very difficult compared to finding people that don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where strikeouts are just so hurtful. Is like, you know, the Mariners in this one series against the Twins a couple days ago, the day that they score 10 runs, they score 10 runs on 10 hits. That's weird. You don't usually 10 runs, you have 15, 16, 17 hits to go along with it. So 10 runs on 10 hits is weird. I can't remember, I think it was the very next day, they score 3 runs on 10 hits. So the volatility there between the run scoring kind of points to the strikeout problem, right? Like, you're getting these guys on base. One game, you happen to drive them in, but you did it with the long ball, which has been their MO, hitting home runs, driving guys in with home runs. It's like, if they don't hit a home run, they're not getting those guys in from second base or third base because they're not making productive outs. And there's something to be said for productive outs. It's why people criticize stats like batting average, for example, because you can be a very productive hitter by making productive outs, moving a guy over or getting a guy in on a fielder's choice, for example, right? Like, things like that can be helpful, but the Mariners aren't even putting the ball in play to get those guys in when they're standing there on third base. So that, that strikeout issue really becomes a problem as a result of that.
Yeah. I will say, and this is maybe, I just would like a quick answer from you, and I suspect we'll have a decent chance of seeing an off season that starts in early October to talk about this maybe more like on a grand scale. But since 2001, the Mariners have never had a season where they were more than 10% better than league average, according to WRC Plus. Most of those years, as you'd expect, they're worse than league average. And this is a park adjusted stat, by the way. This is not something that's just exclusively a product of Safeco, now T-Mobile Park. What do you think? Is it? It can't just be because free agents don't want to come here because they won't hit here, because there have been free agents that have come here, and also teams aren't built from free agents. Their free agents are, the dressing on a salad, not the primary thing that's in the salad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So to me, it feels like two things.
Also, one second. Let me. I want to say one thing before I let you fucking wriggle out of this. It's also multiple philosophies. It's also multiple front offices. It's multiple coaches that have all had this exact same problem, basically. It hasn't always been strikeouts. The Mariners have not been able to put together a very good offense since 2001.
Well, I mean, just looking at the regime that's there now, the Dipoto regime, their philosophy has probably been very close to the same the entire time they've been there. And at least for the past few years, the offense hasn't been any good. So that's why you kind of have to look at the philosophy and say, they've shuffled out the various coaches who work with the offense. They turn that personnel over all the time. So it's not the personnel, right? Like, those guys keep changing. The offense keeps sucking, So it's like whatever the message is that they're trying to get through to the players from the top down, that seems to be part of the problem. Right. Like, that has to be at least some of the problem, even if they don't want to admit that. The other problem is that these guys, we know ownership has basically given them a free pass. I mean, their feet have never really been held to the fire. They're in year 500 now, it seems like, on the job, and there's no end in sight. Nothing you could ever say about Jerry Dipoto or his entire regime will get them fired. So they're basically operating without any reason to have to change their philosophy, right? And you don't have to go do the work to change your philosophy if you know it's not going to hurt you in the long run. But the other issue, I mean, when it comes to the personnel itself on the field, the batters that you have, there is something to be said for a lineup as a unit. If you take a great hitter like Julio Rodriguez and you put him in a batting order where he has like no protection, right? If he's batting 2, but your 3-hole hitter right now, Jorge Polanco, is not really a guy that scares you. Like, not only is Jorge Polanco hitting sub 200 right now, but Jorge Polanco is not striking fear into the hearts of pitchers. He's just not, like, that's not a thing that's going to happen. You're not going to be worried you're not going to feel the same way about Aaron Judge walking up to the plate as you do about Jorge Polanco. So there's something to be said for the lineup as a whole, because right now, even your best hitters, they just don't have anybody protecting them. The Mariners get so fixated on like handedness in a lineup, going right, left, all the way down. They get fixated on handedness against pitchers. So, your righties against your lefties and so on, that it almost seems like their lineup construction doesn't necessarily prioritize their best hitters. Like, Cal Raleigh is probably, outside of Julio, probably your most feared hitter in that lineup, but his position in the lineup, the batting order often changes, right? Like, that's a guy that should be entrenched at 3 or 4 in this lineup, because he's a switch hitter, so you don't have to worry about the handedness thing. And then B, he's a guy that can, with any swing, can take the ball out of the park. Jorge Polanco is not really a home run hitter. Putting him at 3 to protect Julio seems foolish in some ways. If you look at a guy like Teoscar Hernandez, who was here last year, he pretty much batted 4 or 5, I think, for most of the entire year. That's where he was in the lineup, but he didn't hit very well. Now he goes to Los Angeles. He's playing for the Dodgers, and he's doing great. Now, he might regress. Like, his numbers might come down, but you have to think, like, being in a better lineup with so many great hitters around him, that takes a lot of the pressure off him. It means not only is the pressure off him, but he's going to see better pitches to hit, because, Teoscar Hernandez is not your main worry with that Dodgers lineup, right? It's probably Shohei Ohtani or some of these other guys. Well, the thing about Julio in this lineup, without any other guys to back his ass up, he's getting tough pitches to hit every single time, because if you're a pitcher, you're going to unload the arsenal on Julio. knowing that Jorge Polanco's ass, who might get you for a single, is coming up next. Like, who gives a shit? Who gives a shit what Jorge Polanco does to you? You're worried about Julio hitting the ball out of the park. And then when you got, Ty France in there, just one of two things is going to happen with Ty France, right? He's either going to strike out or he's going to ground into a double play. These are guys that aren't threatening to you as a pitcher or as an opposing team, because even their best outcomes aren't really going to hurt you that much. And because they're so fixated on hitting home runs, that really puts the spot that they're looking for a pitch to hit. It makes it very, very, very narrow. Right. So you can work those corners and they're going to saw off a pitch. They're going to ground. They're going to roll it over. They're going to pull it. They're going to, they're going to do things that you want them to do with those pitches. And it just seems like because of that philosophy, it makes this team susceptible to not just striking out a lot, but, putting together these bad at bats that compound this problem over and over and over again and really kind of write the playbook for how to get them out.
I have a lot of that I disagree with, or I think is not well quantified. But I don't want to. We have a whole season to grind this to a fine powder.
Yeah,
and
I'll just say, like, a lot of that, what I just said, cannot be quantified very easily. I mean, I think there are two sides of baseball. I think there's the quantifiable and the qualifiable. And some of the it's like when you talk about any person, like anybody you've ever worked with, right? There are tangibles and there are intangibles. Some people are just, they produce work, but they're like assholes. So their intangibles suck, but their tangibles are great. I think there's that element to baseball. And I think as analytics have risen and have a place in the game, we tend to overlook a lot of the qualifiables that, just the whole, what becomes like this engine of a team working together to actually produce. Like the Twins are a great example of that in this series. Nobody on that team is like a metrics darling necessarily, but for whatever reason, they hit the shit out of the ball against the Mariners.
I guess what I would say is I think there's studies that kind of go against some of the stuff you said. But what I will say is, regardless of what the studies say, regardless of what analytics say, and the constant opposition and push and pull of analytics versus quantification versus qualification, all that stuff, which I agree with. I agree that like it does exist, and I'm open to that idea. It doesn't matter because this team is nominally an analytics focused team, which by the way they all are at this point. They're not. The Mariners aren't even close to unique. They're part of. I would suspect that the Mariners are one of the dumber teams analytics wise in baseball. And so I don't really think. I think this idea that we just have this idea in our mind that Jerry Dipoto is fucking early 2000s Billy Beane, and he's not that. He's a fucking idiot. He's not.
He does a really good job of convincing you he's the smartest person in the room. But I think your point is important. Every single team in Major League Baseball is so bought into analytics and so much more bought into analytics than anybody really thinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you kind of have to like wipe that away. That is almost, it's not really a variable at this point. Every team does it and invests a ton in that side of things. So you just have to look at the results. And you're right. They probably do suck at it compared to other teams because the end result
But they talk about it so much more that people get fooled.
Yeah, they do. It's like when we've all worked with people that behave in this way, the way that Jerry Dipoto does, right? We've all worked with somebody who does a really good job promoting themselves and working their way up the chain because they're just bullshitters. And
some people convince everybody call that guy to like Alex Akita.
I'm not above. I am not above doing what I got to do to advance myself.
I guess that's like, to me, the reason I don't even want to dig into it is the finer points, the like hair splitting of analytics versus narrative. It's irrelevant. This team has been shitty for most of his regime.
Right.
They're constantly making these moves that are just these like kind of hedges on getting like small marginal gains. Where I think, like, pick a fucking direction. Either go through free agency, which they're obviously not going to do, or build a team that is just so deep. The Astros, what we see the Astros doing is not necessarily going out and spending a bunch in free agency, right? It's next man up. They have another guy in their farm system ready to replace whoever gets injured, whoever leaves in free agency, whoever stops being effective. Or the Dodgers, who just spend until they're going to be in luxury tax hell, the Mariners don't want to do either of those things. They're stuck between these philosophies, not really committed to either. Doesn't matter if it's analytics or whatever. This is a team that's, I think, destined to be mediocre at the very minimum until this front office is gone.
They're a gambler. They're a gambler who will never raise their bet and is happy walking out of the casino with a $5 profit. Even if
that's not even right. Profit in the sense of actual money. I'm talking like they're fine. They're like, well, that every time they leave the casino, they're like, well, $20 is a pretty cheap day of entertainment.
Yeah,
like they lost $20 every time.
That's exactly what it is. It's like you could have had $1 million, right?
Yes.
Like you could have won or lost $1 million. The Mariners are like so afraid to like lose all their money at the casino that they will never make the wager to win, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's kind of the way I see it. And looking at it in gambling terms, it's like if you're a Jeopardy fan, you probably know James Holzhauer. James Holzhauer is probably the greatest Jeopardy player of all time. One of the things he did, because he had a background in gambling and in sports, is he would always, anytime he hit a daily double, he recognized the value of a daily double, and he would more often than not wager all of his winnings on that one question. A, because he was smart enough to know he was probably going to get it right. But B, because he saw like, hey, this is a chance to double my money that nobody else has, that only comes along 3 times in these games of Jeopardy.
Yeah.
And he took advantage of that, that variable right there. And the Mariners are like terrified to play the game that way, right? They play extremely conservatively, both fiscally, which we've talked a lot about, and just in the way that they do things, the way the people that they bring in, their philosophies themselves. It's like they're trying to find a marginal victory of 1%, which is fine. Like, if you're profiting 1%, it's still a profit, but they're happy with that. Like the goal in baseball is to win the championship. It's not to improve incrementally every year or within the context of a year. It's to win a championship. And that does not seem to be their understanding of what the objective is.
Yeah. The Mariners are like someone who goes to the casino and doesn't understand the concept of the casino's rake. And they're like, I won 85 games. It's like, you still lost. 85 games is still a loss. You didn't make the playoffs. You've never won a championship. You're no closer than you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, these might not be fully vetted out ideas. It's just, this is why I'm like always hesitant to put them on. This is like it's like, how many decades are we going to keep having the same conversation?
Yeah.
I feel like baseball has almost gotten boring because it's like, every year they're going to have stretches of good, stretches of bad. They're probably going to win somewhere between 75 and 85 games and never make an attempt to really win a championship. I'm fine with them not spending money. I would be fine with a full-scale rebuild, but it's too late now. You started the clock again on Julio Rodriguez like you did with Felix Hernandez, so now you're going to spend this time trying to like keep these bobbleheads moving instead of fucking... You know what I mean? Like it's you of course you know what I mean.
It's frustrating. I mean, it's so funny because we've talked about this before. But
I also like how we were about to end this topic and now we're 10 minutes further in, and I'm more passionate about it than I was 10 minutes ago.
Well, it's like in the NFL and the NBA, like if dudes have a 500 season, they're fired. Like everyone, like clean house, everyone's gone. Like and the NFL and the NBA are like almost too reactive to bad seasons, whereas in Major League Baseball, you got teams. I mean, the Mariners are not unique in this. You have other franchises that year after year after year, they pretty much suck and get away with it, right? It's just maybe it's because it's such a long season, because it spans so much time and so many games that like you can't, even as most fans, especially the ones who pay the bills and go to the games, right, cannot be that passionate about it compared to the NFL and the NBA, because there's just not the same spotlight on every single game in baseball as there is in basketball and football. So I don't know what it's just funny because it's like none of these 3 leagues kind of like find the middle ground, like how to react to a good or bad season appropriately. They overreact in baseball, or they overreact in the NBA and the NFL, and they probably underreact in Major League Baseball. And that's how you get stuck like the Mariners, where you're just in purgatory basically, which is really only hurts the fans. The players come and go, personnel comes and goes, but we're always going to be here and we just want to win.
I know. And it's and I feel like as a city going through like and you and I were born, so I was born in 86, you're probably born in like 73. I don't know, you're very old. What are you, 85?
84.
Okay.
Well, probably not even 2 years ahead of you.
Wait, shit. Are you 40 yet?
No, not yet. I turned 40 this year.
What month?
Year. Not until October. It's a ways away.
Okay.
Yeah, we got time.
Anyway, we're gonna have a special episode. We're gonna have a special episode that's obviously not on your actual birthday, but where you actually come into the studio and we drink some whiskey together for the first time in a year.
Talk about my 40 years on this earth.
Your disgusting 40-year-old body.
I'll tell my entire life story in 90 minutes.
That's what I was hoping for. Anyways, when I was growing up, 1979 Sonics championship, when nobody would shut up about, even though I think it was the 84 Seahawks when they went to the NFC championship game, that was like the crowning achievement post Sonics championship was the 1984 Jim Zorn and Steve Largent and maybe a rookie Kurt Warner and Chuck Knox, Ground Chuck. The Seahawks had an identity, and it was like that was the thing. And I spent my entire childhood watching Dennis Erickson-led Seahawks teams. And frankly, I love Lou Piniella, but the 90s Mariners had no, until 95, 96, they had no identity basically outside of the shitty team with the best players in baseball somehow. How that happened, I don't really understand. And just it never felt like as a fan base there was ever going to be a championship. So it was kind of, let's just enjoy sports as they are. And then the Seahawks win and it changes things. The Seahawks have a decade of elite success. Yeah. They're not a dynasty, but a decade of elite success. For Seattle, they're a dynasty. And now you're everybody should do that.